join me at Proverbs chapter 4. We will continue on the right path this evening. That's my title at Proverbs chapter number 4. When we read in scriptures the way or the road or the path, it's generally all the same Hebrew word, if you will, and that carries through to the New Testament as well. And in this particular section of Proverbs, the path or the way is the key picture that is used in this chapter. And Solomon has now just delivered to us the wisdom of multiple generations. We saw the wisdom of David last week, and now he's going to encourage us to keep on with the way of wisdom. And join me, if you will, in reading at Proverbs chapter number 4, starting at verse 10. Solomon says, "Hear, O my son, and receive my sayings, and the years of thy life shall be many. I have taught thee in the way of wisdom. I have led thee in the right paths. When thou goest, thy steps shall not be straitened. And when thou runnest, thou shalt not stumble. Take hold fast of instruction, let her not go. Keep her, for she is thy life. Enter not into the path of the wicked, and go not in the way of evil men. Avoid it, pass not by it, turn from it, and pass away. For they sleep not, except they have done mischief, and their sleep is taken away, unless they cause some to fall. For they eat the bread of wickedness, and drink the wine of violence. But the path of the just is as the shining light, that shineth more and more into the perfect day. The way of the wicked is as darkness. They know not at what they stumble." And so as we look at these verses, there's an aspect of repetition, and there's an aspect of repetition in all of these admonitions from Solomon. And of course, you've heard this before. He says to embrace wisdom, to keep wisdom, and to do so all of your life. And he says because literally all of life and all of eternity are dependent upon this one particular factor. If you get nothing else from the words of this paternal instruction, he says to get wisdom. However, we also learn that this acquisition, this purchase of wisdom is not a one-time purchase. It's not a one-time procurement. He says that keeping wisdom is often, so frequently, a daily deliberation. It is a continuous decision. It is constant to do what is right. He says you must apply the Word of God. You must follow the leading of the Holy Spirit. And it is always, it is all the time, it is constant. In essence, you need to be conformed to Christ. And that's not something that happens at one point in time. That is something that happens continuously over a lifetime. Let me read to you the comments of Ray Ortland, who I frequently look at in studying these passages. He says that life is a journey. There's no quick fix. And we take it one step at a time with a constant moment-by-moment recommitment to the way of Christ. In this section, Solomon's main message is to continue on the right path. Never waver, never wander from the way of wisdom. And he begins that admonition with the first few verses that we see here, a father's welcome. He welcomes you onto the right path. In verse 10, we see the father's advice. It starts with hear. This admonition, which is actually a command, again, the advice of the father, hear, my son, receive my sayings. Again, it's repetitive. It's nothing new. You've heard me say this before. You've heard Solomon say this before. Hear and receive my sayings. We heard this in Solomon's opening speech in chapter 1 and verse number 8. He says, "My son, hear the instruction of thy father, forsake not the law of thy mother." He repeated it in chapter 3 and verse 1. He said, "My son, forget not my law, let thine heart keep my commandments." We heard it at the opening of this very chapter. In chapter 4, verse 1, he said, "Hear ye children," the plural. "Hear ye children the instruction of a father, attend to know understanding." But when you take this advice, don't just hear it. In verse number 13, he says, hold on to it. Take fast hold of instructions. Again, in chapter 1 and verse 8, don't just hear the instruction of the father. He says, forsake not the law of her mother. That's hold. That's the same concept. In chapter 2, in verse number 1, my son, if thou wilt receive my words, hide my commandments with thee. Then you understand the fear of the Lord. Then you find the knowledge of God. In chapter 3 and verse number 21, so shall they be life to thy soul. So shall they be grace to thy neck. In chapter 3, let them not depart from thine ears. Keep sound wisdom and discretion. Verse number 21. Chapter 4, verse number 20. What's coming in the very next section? My son, attend to my words. Incline thine ear to my sayings. So he says, not just hear the advice, but hold this advice. You must keep it. And as we've heard so many times, wisdom, true wisdom that this book points to, is Solomon's future son, Solomon's excellent son, Solomon's perfect son, is Christ. And so don't miss the fact in all of these books, or in all of these commands here, that wisdom is both a person that you must know and a path that you must walk. You must know the person of wisdom in order to walk on the path of wisdom. John chapter 14 in verse number 6, Jesus picks up and he repeats in fact, he perfects this very concept. He says, I am the way. He says, I am the path. I am the road. I am the way and the truth and the life, and no man cometh unto the Father but by me. And so Solomon gives us this advice in these first few verses. And in verse 12, he not only tells us this advice, but he says it is to our advantage. He says, when thou goest, thy steps shall not be straitened. When thou runnest, thou shalt not stumble. Take fast hold of instruction. Let her not go. Keep her, for she is thy life. The first advantage that we see is your health. In verse 10, we've seen this before. How many times have we seen that wisdom gives you life? Long life here is provided in verse number 10. Again, it's very repetitive. In chapter 3, verse number 2, we saw that for length of days and long life and peace shall they add to thee. In verse number 18 of chapter 3, she is a tree of life to them that lay hold on her. Happy is everyone that retaineth her. That does not mean that you're guaranteed to have a long and happy life just because you have embraced wisdom. But what Solomon does here espouse is the fact that when you do the things that represent wisdom, they tend towards a long life. Again, I'll remind you that Proverbs is not promises, but they are principles. When you embrace wisdom, it tends to make you do the things that would engender long life, right? They not only bring you health, but they bring you help. Look to verse number 11. I have taught thee in the way of wisdom. I have led thee in the right paths. I'm going to call this the lighted path. I have led thee in the right paths. That word there literally means the paths of uprightness. I have led you into the paths of uprightness. Of course, you know Psalm 119, verse 105. Thy word is a lamp unto my feet. It's a light unto my path. Jesus, again, speaks of this very thing in John 8, verse number 12. He says, I am the light of the world. He that followeth me shall not walk in darkness, but shall have the light of life. You follow wisdom, you will have a lighted path. In verse number 12, we also see that it is a large path. When thou goest, thy steps shall not be straightened. That word there for straightened is a Hebrew word that means to be constricted. Now understand that, I understand that broad gate and broad road is the way that leads to destruction, and it's a narrow path and a narrow road that leads to rightness. This is not contradicting that illustration that the Lord gives us. But what Solomon is saying here is that your steps will not be straightened. That word there for straightened is a Hebrew word that means to be constricted. He says your paths are not going to be constricted. And it's a concept of a freedom of movement. Psalm 119, again, verse number 45 says, and I will walk at liberty. I will walk at liberty because I seek thy precepts. And so this freedom of movement has the idea of rest. Freedom comes from obedience to the commands of Christ. We learned this in 1 John chapter 5 and verse number 3. This is the love of God, that we keep his commandments. His commandments are not grievous. And so what Solomon is doing here is he's contrasting that with evil workers. Again, we see that Solomon so often picks up and he expands upon the wisdom that we see in Job, the earliest of the wisdom books, Job chapter 18 and verse number 7. The steps of his strength shall be straightened, they shall be constrained, and his own counsel shall cast him down. And there he's speaking about the perverse man, the evil man, the one that resists God. His steps, the steps of his strength will be straightened. They'll just be constricted. So we have lighted paths, we have large paths, and also in verse 12 then we see a level path. When thou goest, thy steps shall not be straitened, and when thou runnest, thou shalt not stumble. You can run and not stumble. Psalm 18, verse 36. Thou hast enlarged my steps under me, that my feet did not slip. And so this concept is a path that is smooth. It's a path that is well marked. It's a path that is worn down. It's an illustration that I've used that is well-trodden path by those who have marched on before us. It's the very concept that Jeremiah uses in Jeremiah chapter 6 and verse number 16. Thus saith the Lord, stand ye in the ways and see and ask for the old paths, where is the good way, and walk therein, and then you shall find rest for your souls. Why are they the good paths? Because, as Hebrews chapter 11 says, there have been so many faithful witnesses who have gone on before, who have marked the path, who have left us the trail. Proverbs 3 and verse 23, just a page back. Then they shall walk, or then shalt thou walk in thy way safely, and thy foot shall not stumble. These are the exact concepts, I believe, that we read of in Isaiah chapter 40, verse number 30 and 31. Even the youths shall faint, and they'll be weary. The young men shall utterly fall. But they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run, not be weary. They shall walk, and they shall not faint. This is the welcomed path that the Father invites us into in the way of wisdom. That's the Father's welcome. Come to the right paths. Walk therein. Then in verse 14 through 17, we see a Father's warning. Verses 10 through 10 through 13, we see the Father's welcome. And now we see the Father's warning. And he's warning us against the wicked paths. Notice in verse 14 and 15, we see his warning against their actions. Much has been said previously about the path, the way, the road of the righteous. And so now Solomon briefly turns his attention to the path of the wicked. Where is the path of the wicked? Where is the way of the evil men? And in verse 14, he says, do not enter. Enter not into the path of the wicked. Do not go in the way of evil men. In verse 15, he says, avoid it. Avoid it. Also in verse 15, he says, turn away from it. In verse 15, twice, the same command is repeated in the very same verse. He said, pass not by it. Pass away from it. And he said, don't even walk by it. Turn away. The concept is don't even look that way. Shield your eyes. Turn away. Just avoid it altogether. Don't look. I mean, it's the same advice that your parents gave you. It's the same advice that your grandparents used to tell you. If you want to avoid the consequence of sin, then you just avoid the dangerous activity altogether. Don't even look at it. Don't see how close to the edge you can come without falling over. Don't see how close you can come to sin without getting burned. You just avoid it altogether. If you can't pay the ticket, don't drive fast. If you don't want to spend the night in jail, then don't do whatever it is that might land you in jail. Don't do the activity. Don't even look at it. Don't even go there. Don't even look that direction. Turn away. Don't walk by it. In fact, don't just not walk by it. Don't even go over it. Don't even look at it. Don't even look at it. Verse 16. After he talks about their actions, he talks about their attacks. See, these people, they don't even sleep unless they do some mischief. Their sleep's taken away unless they cause somebody else to fall. They have to perform some evil. That's what that word mischief means. There is no sleep unless they do some sort of mischief, some sort of evil. Psalm 36 verse 4 says, he deviseth mischief upon his bed. He setteth himself in a way that is not good. He abhorreth not evil. And what the psalmist there is saying is, this is a fellow that stays up all night just thinking of what kind of evil he can do. And I mean, I've had a lot of sleepless nights. I've had a lot of sleepless nights lately. But I can promise you this, from the bottom of my heart, I have never had a sleepless night staying up to think of what evil I can do. I've had a few that I'm trying to stay up thinking of what good I can do somebody, but I've never had a sleepless night trying to think of something I could do that was devious and heinous and evil. And that's what he's saying here. They don't sleep because they're trying to dream up some mischief. No sleep unless they have a way to hurt others. Micah chapter 2, verse number 1. And if you're taking notes, you can write that down. Micah chapter 2, verse 1 says, woe to them that devise iniquity and work evil upon their beds. When the morning is light, they go practice it because it's in the power of their hand. And he's basically saying, hey, there's some people that lay awake at night dreaming up evil. And when they get this evil dreamed up, as soon as the sun comes up, they go enact their plans. And then verse 17 says, worse, they eat the bread of wickedness, they drink the wine of violence. You ever heard somebody say, like, we eat and drink baseball, we eat and drink football? You've heard somebody say that about their favorite sports team, right? I'm not looking at anybody in particular. We eat and drink this stuff, right? You've heard that expression before. They eat the bread of wickedness. They drink the wine of violence. He said, hey, we eat and drink this stuff, man. We just live on making other people miserable. The wicked consume evil, and they are consumed by evil. And Solomon just says, stay as far away from this path as you possibly can. Don't go there. Don't walk on it. Don't walk next to it. Don't even look at it. It'll burn your eyes out. Don't look at it. And these last two verses. A father's wisdom. The paths of the righteous. And I want you to pick up a different word here. We saw, first of all, his welcome to the right paths. We saw his warning against the wrong paths. And now we want to see, finally, in these last two verses, a father's wisdom, and that is the righteous paths. That's a different word. It's paths of the just. And there's some significant phrases I want you to see here. The path of the just, the path of the righteous, is as the shining light that shineth more and more into the perfect day. The way of the wicked, the road of the wicked, is as darkness. They know not at what they stumble. You see, the believer is being made righteous daily. The believer is being made more like Christ every day. And I want you to note here, first of all, that in verses 10 through 13, he's talking about the procedures, okay? In verses 18 and 19, he's talking about position, positionally. In other words, in the first section, verses 10 through 13, he's talking about being right. In verses 18 and 19, he's talking about being righteous. And so the word here is translated just. In verse number 11, you pick this up. Verse number 11, the word right, for right paths, is a Hebrew word that means uprightness. I have led thee in right paths. That Hebrew word literally means uprightness. And in verse number 18, but the path of the just is as the shining light. That word there for just is a Hebrew word that means a righteous person. Okay? And so in verse number 11, we're talking about correct behavior. In verse number 18, we're talking about a consecrated believer. That's the difference. That's the difference in those two phrases. One of them we're talking about your action, and the other one we're talking about your person, your position. And that's why in this section it's talking about sanctification. Our sanctification, our becoming like Christ, our being transformed is a choice that we make. And it's a choice that we make daily. And we must make that choice consciously. We must make that choice continuously. We must make that choice consciously to do right. Yes, we are right. We are made just by the Father because of the Son. But we must also make that choice to do right, to behave according to our name, to behave according to our position. Every single day. Following Christ is never a one-time decision. And that's why Solomon in this book keeps saying the same thing over and over and over and over. Because when you read chapter 1 today, have you all ever heard that a proverb a day keeps the devil away? And I wonder if God wrote this way, because in chapter 1, when you read that on the first day of the month, you need to make a conscious decision to become more consecrated and to become more like Christ. And when you read Proverbs chapter 2, on the second day of the month, you need to make a conscious decision to be more sanctified, more consecrated, more like Christ. And here comes the third day of the month, and you need to make a conscious decision to be more like Christ, to be more sanctified, and to be more consecrated. And along comes the fourth day of the month, and it's getting kind of repetitious, isn't it? But the Christian life is just that way. It's a daily decision because Satan is after you every day. And it's a daily grind. And it's a daily decision. And we need to make this decision every day. I'm not talking about a decision for salvation. That's not true. But it is a decision that we make to put ourselves down and put ourselves second or third or fourth and to put Christ first in our life. That's a decision that we make every single day. Every hour. Multiple times a day. Following Christ is never a one-time decision. That's a decision that we make consciously. And that's what he says here. It's a conscious decision because it's a deliberate decision. I said it's a continuous decision because it's a daily decision. I say here it's a cautious decision because it's a difficult decision. Can I just tell you that sometimes doing the right thing isn't easy? Because sometimes the right thing is not easy, and sometimes the right thing is not apparent. Can I just be real honest with you? Sometimes I'm not sure what the right thing is. I'm willing to do the right thing. You just tell me what the right thing is. Proverbs 11:14 says, where no counsel is, the people fall, but in the multitude of counselors there is safety. But you know, we're also told that a talebearer causes strife. And we're also told that love covers a multitude of sins. And so sometimes I don't know what the right thing is to do. And so we do the right thing, but we do it consciously and continuously and cautiously. And so part of this talks about our behavior. And part of this talks about our being. Yes, we're on the right path. We need to make sure we're on the righteous path as well. Verse number 18. These significant phrases lead us to a shining path, or the path of light. The path of the just is as the shining light that shineth more and more unto the perfect day. And we've already read that Christ is our road. He's our way to new life. Jesus said to him, I am the way and the truth and the life. No man cometh unto the Father but by me. And so Christ is our road. Christ is our Redeemer. And we don't have to go to the New Testament to see that. Psalm 23 verse 3, He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for His name's sake. That's the Psalm of the Shepherd. It comes right after Psalm 22, which is the Psalm of the Cross. And it comes right before Psalm 24, which is the Psalm of the Crown. Those are all messianic. We know exactly that they're talking about the coming Messiah. He restores my soul. He leads me in the paths of righteousness for His name's sake. And so Christ is our road. Christ is our Redeemer. But Christ is also a responsibility because we must show Him to others. Matthew 5:14 says, you are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hid. Philippians 2:15 says that ye may be blameless and harmless, the sons of God without rebuke, in the midst of a crooked and perverse nation, among whom you shine as the lights in the world. We've got a job. Christ is also our reward. We will inherit Christ. And when we inherit Christ, we will reign with Him. In reference to the end times, we studied this in Daniel chapter 12. Daniel chapter 12, verse 3. And they that be wise, Proverbs is all about wisdom, right? They that be wise shall shine as the brightness of the firmament. And they that turn many to righteousness as the stars forever and ever. That's a reference to the millennial reign, the coming rule of the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. That's the shining path. But notice verse 19, there's a shaded path. The way of the wicked is as darkness. They know not at what they stumble. And here I believe Solomon is telling us that when we turn our eyes away from Christ, when we turn our eyes away from the way of righteousness, it is a deliberate walk into the darkness of this world. Isaiah 57, verse 20. The wicked are like the troubled sea. It cannot rest, whose waters cast up mire and dirt. There is no peace, saith my God, to the wicked. 1 Samuel 2, verse 9 says, He will keep the feet of His saints, and the wicked shall be silent in darkness, for by strength shall no man prevail. Turn with me quickly to Job chapter 18. Job chapter 18, again, so much of this section is picked up. It's referenced from the wisdom of Job in Job chapter number 18. Bildad speaks, and we'll start reading in verse 5. He says, Yea, the light of the wicked shall be put out, and a spark of his fire shall not shine. The light shall be dark in his tabernacle, and his candle shall be put out with him. The steps of his strength shall be straightened. There's that verse we mentioned earlier. His own counsel shall cast him down, for he is cast into a net by his own feet. and he walketh upon a snare. We have some applications as well in the New Testament. John 11, verse 10, Jesus says, if a man walks in the night, he stumbleth, because there is no light in him. Turn with me to 1 John chapter 2. We studied this when we preached through the epistle of 1 John. 1 John chapter 2, verse 8. Again, a new commandment I write to you, which thing is true in him and in you, because the darkness is past, and the true light now shineth. He that saith he's in the light and hateth his brothers in darkness, even till now, he that loveth his brother abideth in the light, and there's none occasion of stumbling in him. That's the contrast of the shining path and the shaded path that Solomon speaks of. And what does he tell us? The path of the just is as a shining light. And we should be shining more and more into the perfect day. Let me close with this thought. Again, I borrow this from Ray Ortland. This is not original with me. He says that evil becomes compulsive. None of us is above evil, because it is the nature of our depraved hearts. Jesus said that everyone who commits sin becomes a slave of sin. That's John 8, verse 34. Sin becomes a slavery that's deep inside us. It's an emotional engine that we cannot shut down just by choosing to do so. We see this dynamic at work every day. Just think of our politics. Human politics is not just about winning. It becomes about destroying the other person, and then there's no stopping it. Think of the gambling industry. It has an antisocial impact, but then there's no stopping it. We scarcely understand the dark powers that we unleash inside of ourselves when we turn away from the path of Christ's wisdom. We turn away from the light, and we choose the darkness, the way of the wicked, and then we know not at what we stumble. Commit to wisdom. That's Solomon's plea. Keep wisdom. Continue in wisdom. But continuing in wisdom is a daily, deliberate decision that we must walk in wisdom consciously, continuously, and cautiously, and pray that the Lord will bless and that we will become that shining light that shines more and more unto the perfect day. That's a challenge for me. I know that it's a challenge for you. I pray that you will be benefited by that. I pray that you will pray for me, that I would have more wisdom to do just that. Let's stand, Brother Derek.